hydrogeological information. Also, we think the adjudication process, even though we're lucky enough not to be in one of those basins, should be looked at, and recommendations should be provided to the legislature on how to make that process more effective and efficient if folks choose to go that route. Additionally, we should provide additional technical and financial assistance in the formation of groundwater management agencies to those who need it, and establish minimum requirements for groundwater management plans. Also, we just want to make sure that as we move forward that folks that need to undertake this process are successful, and we want to make sure that they have the resources to do so. And we look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Vance Kennedy.
I'll make it yet. Age catches up after a while. My name is Vance Kennedy. I live at 5052 Tully Road in Modesto, California. I have some technical background, and I'm going to be quite frank in my remarks. The groundwater situation in the foothills in our area will soon become an environmental disaster. Many huge wells have been approved, which can reasonably be expected to rapidly deplete the water table to depths of many hundreds of feet. Rainfall will take many decades to recharge the water table after the deep water is too salty or too expensive to pump. Natural systems commonly have built-in inertia, which we can use to our advantage in delaying bad effects. However, once the damage is done, the inertia works against us. When the orchard growers have depleted the groundwater, no one can live there for many decades. The safe yield in that area is probably well under a foot of water per year, since the rainfall is very small. Almond trees need 3 to 4 feet of water per year, and that is what is being pumped. The problem in general was well recognized in the 2003 issue of California Groundwater, published then, but nothing has been done. Don't kick the can down the road, as done in the past. While you delay, small ranchers are losing not just their water, but their whole property, because without water, their property is worthless in its entirety. It should be recognized that lateral permeability of sedimentary rocks is much greater than vertical permeability, sometimes 100 times or more. Hence, a well can affect water tables for far, even thousands of feet from the actual well site. It is indeed a tragedy of the commons. An environmental impact report on wells larger than homes and small businesses should be required. I thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Catherine Rubin, LADWP.
Good afternoon. It's been a long day. So a lot of our ideas I heard this morning from the panel, but I'll try to be short and brief because we'll be turning in our paper as well to the groundwater email. My name is Catherine Rubin. I'm the manager of the Wastewater Quality and Compliance Group for the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. And I want to thank you today for allowing us to provide our oral comments. LADWP is the nation's largest utility, providing water to approximately 4 million people, and LADWP has relied on local groundwater supplies, imported water, and the Los Angeles Aqueduct as the primary source of water. Uncertainties due to the climate change and anticipation of the major disruption of imported supplies due to natural disasters all make the availability of the local groundwater sources even more critical for us. And so we have a major interest in the quality and the management of the groundwater and this conversation today. We've reviewed the proposed questions that you gave out on your notice, and we'd like to address a concept that is fundamental to the discussion of today. The document asserts that some groundwater basins are sustainably managed while others are not. And this document also recognizes, as stated in the state backstop authority section on page 2, that metrics are required. LADWP believes that we must first launch an initiative to develop such metrics. Without these metrics, the impartial assessment of sustainability isn't possible. We also need a cost-effective method for collecting data that will allow the metrics to be applied, which basins have been identified as sustainable, and why. What are the population growth forecasts for each basin? What are current allocations for basins that serve multiple jurisdictions? And are these allocations permanent, or are they revised periodically? And who determines the allocations? And all databases must be interactive so they can be used by multiple agencies without these essential elements. Some of our planning could be premature. So regarding the notice on the expanding the groundwater storage and the allocation, we have a few ideas. And some of them sound like solutions, but they're actually ideas. So with regards to allocation of the groundwater and ability to control pumping, we want to reiterate from our January testimony that we believe that the adjudicated basins that are well managed need to be left to the court. And also, as we heard from Orange County, the non-adjudicated basins that are being well managed can be used as role models. We need state assistance with funding via grants and low-interest loans. We need support for water bonds. We need to expand the participation of the potentially responsible parties for on-site control, on-site remediation, and financial participation. We need to provide policies and funding for collaboration with local entities on PRP identification. And we need to provide funding for remediation of contaminants which remain unaddressed by PRPs. We also need to include projects with maximum benefit to the associated basin and community at the lowest relative costs. And we believe that we should be prioritizing those basins that are not well managed in order of how we're going to take care of those and allow the state to have some sort of mechanism to step in for those basins. On the issue of, I think we heard this morning on basins that are where we have the topic of basins of sub-basins that span multiple jurisdictions. LADWP believes partnerships are the best model and would help ensure that all parties receive fair allocations. We believe that there needs to be some sort of database so that everybody knows what is going on in these adjacent basins. Regarding, are there improvements to the groundwater adjudication process that would make it more useful and cost-effective for local authorities? Again, as we've mentioned, adjudicated basins that are well managed should be left with the court process. Adjudications can provide an effective and reliable framework for cooperative management over groundwater resources. Any improvements to an existing groundwater adjudicated process must be looked at on a case-by-case basis, and efforts to modify an adjudication should always be led by the court's jurisdiction. So in summary, because I can see I'm running out of time here, we believe that adjudicated basins that are well managed should be left to the courts. We should expand funding mechanisms, such as we need to support the water bonds. We need to focus on the basins and areas where there is greatest need. Non-adjudicated basins should be prioritized based on vulnerability, degree of deficiency, or insufficient management practices. We also need to allow for good science in this regulatory process so that requirements that are made are based on costs on a cost-benefit basis. And LADWP also agrees with and supports the ideas and recommendations made by ACWA this morning. And we look forward to working with you at the next workshop in April. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next is Jennifer Clary, Clean Water Action.
So I'll try to keep it short because it's been a very long day. Jennifer Clary, Clean Water Action. I just want to put in a pitch for transparency. I know everyone says it's important that we get to keep our data here, but as with some of you up in the dais, I've been participating in the Governor's Drinking Water Stakeholder Group for the last almost 2 years, and finding how much we don't know, even though the data is collected, is really frustrating. So in order for you to properly govern or understand when you have to interfere in a local groundwater management plan, you really need an understanding. And when I look at data that you do and don't have, you know who the major groundwater users are, but you got to figure you've got 7,500 water systems that we know about, and out of that, about 700 of them are actually big water systems that'll be able to participate in this planning effort. So you have 6,800 systems that aren't going to participate, but that are going to be impacted by this. Over and above that, you have 2 million Californians who aren't served by a public water system, who have no way of, who are going to be impacted by this, but have no way to participate. So what you're doing is your role is to stand in for those folks who aren't going to be part of this. So when you decide if a groundwater basin is sustainable, you need to do that on behalf of those people with those shallow wells who are going to be the first impacted and the last to understand what's going on. So I just want to put in a pitch for that. And also the governance issues. You know, we all have been through the IRWINT process, and there's good ones and there's bad ones. I would say that the $472 million that was released in the drought package this year, I would hope that the local IRWIMPs all feel like their AB 3030 plans are where those dollars need to be invested, because it's not clear to me that new dollars should be invested, and I hope that's not what people are proposing. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, we have Carol Perkins, Butte Environmental Council.
Good afternoon. My name is Carol Perkins, Butte Environmental Council. I live in Butte County. I'm a groundwater dependent citizen with no representation. I want to give a shout out to Jennifer, thanks, and Omar for comments earlier. I live in a region where 86% of the state's water supply either originates and or flows through. I'm a little bit disappointed today that there wasn't one voice from my region. I'm not a drought denier. However, California's water crisis is due to mismanagement, not simply because we're experiencing a change in climate. Hydrology and geology do matter. It doesn't really appear that the state, the California Water Action Plan understands this, and I think this is really important. I'm going to focus on 2 areas of the plan that are most disconcerting to me. That is the the issue of groundwater storage. It has to be carefully approached. And it may not work everywhere. Again, I want to stress hydrology and geology are very important. The Sacramento River Valley is not the same as the San Joaquin River Valley. Our region, the Sacramento River hydrologic region, is a fairly robust system, but it's at the tipping point. The second issue is this issue of local agencies having management or governance, holding government and governance and management positions. We have to be careful with that definition. Again, I have nobody representing me in my interests, and as Jennifer pointed out, neither do 2 million of my neighbors. Water agencies in my region are not representative of by any stretch of the imagination. Overlying groundwater dependent land owners must have a significant seat at the table. I think that's all I want to say. Obviously, I've got a lot to say, but I'll share that in comments, and I thank you for the presentations today.
Thank you very much. Barbara Hennigan from the Butte-Sutter Basin Area Groundwater Users.
My name is Barbara Hennigan. I usually introduce myself as a groundwater groupie because I'm the volunteer staff of a groundwater users group that has no income and was organized in 1991. So we've been around for a long time, and I've been to a lot of these meetings. One of the things that I find disappointing is that I believe this process has skipped a couple of the beginning steps. And the probability that any existing entity, whether water district, school district, state, county, anything, have boundaries that in some way mirror an actual hydrologic groundwater basin is vanishingly small. So I would give you the example of Lassen County, which just finished up their BMO, and their Honey Lake Valley Basin ends at the state line with Nevada. Now, it is not reasonable to govern and require care of the aquifer for the people in Lassen County when just across the state line, the city of Reno has put in 6 large production wells in that same basin. So the first thing that I think that you need to make sure is that nobody is allowed to have a straw in the basin that is not covered by the governance entity. The with DWR redoing Bulletin 18, it's probably a pretty good time to establish what aquifers really are. And we know that there are alluvial aquifers, but 1,000 feet down there may be a confined aquifer in the same location. And so this is what we need now, is to identify which aquifers, and we need to know where the recharge zones. The Edwards Aquifer in Texas had to have a special, the legislature had to pass a special law so that they could create the Edwards Aquifer Authority. 6 counties overlay the basin. 2 counties had no basin, but they were the recharge zone, and so they were included in the Edwards Aquifer Authority. So we have to work with, as I said, hydrologic reality. And DWR can best help with that mapping as they redo Bulletin 118. The second thing is that groundwater governing entities have to be elected by those people with a dog in the fight. They have to be seen as fair. As an example, the Butte County BMO had 16 subregions. 4 of the subregions were drawn around water district boundaries. They had paid staff whose job description said attend water meetings. One of the regions was a ranch wholly owned by a public employees union in Oregon. They had 1 vote and paid staff to do it. Originally, there was no entity to deal with the 120,000 people living in Chico. Eventually, they drew a circle around it and said, you people go off in the corner and find some volunteer to represent you at the Water Advisory Committee meeting. And then there were these others, which were the large areas of farmers dependent on groundwater with no surface water availability. The meetings were held during the day, and if you were the volunteer for, say, the city of Chico, and you couldn't get off your job, you couldn't be there to vote. So we had 1 person representing an Oregon union who had 1 vote, and 1 person who may not be able to get there representing 120 people dependent on groundwater who had 1 vote, but if they couldn't get the day off, they weren't involved. So I think it's important that you stress that any governing entity really must represent everybody with a dog in the fight. It's not terribly expensive. The state could help with those kinds of costs to make sure that people participate. The third point that I'd like to get across is the idea about local financing. If conditions 1, the actual aquifer, and conditions 2, what is seen as fair governance, are done, the locals will participate. 2 weeks ago, there was a meeting of the Groundwater Resources Association in conjunction with a irrigators conference. There were 2 people from southeastern New Mexico who came to the irrigators conference, but they thought the groundwater stuff was so much more interesting, they were at our meetings. They were tall, they had cowboy hats, big buckles. They snorted anytime anybody mentioned climate change. They would not be unwelcome among my new neighbors in the state of Jefferson. However, they were on the board of their groundwater management authority. They had been elected by their neighbors. The entire aquifer was mapped. They had agreed to pay so much an acre to support the activities of the authority. They had limited themselves to 3.5 acre-feet per acre. They had meters on their wells. I mean, it was everything everybody dreams about having. So it was a very unlikely group to have done that. But they had a dog in that fight. That was their aquifer that they needed to protect. So I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind. The group that I represent, Butte-Sutter Basin Area Groundwater Users, was formed in 1991 when in the mid-'80s, DWR announced that we were sitting on a vast underutilized resource. That was the hammer. And a lot of the local people said, we want a second opinion. So our group, the county, the water districts, Cal Water that served the city of Chico, we all contributed to buy a hydrologic groundwater model so we could have a second opinion. The importance of understanding the links of people to the land and the water that is under it. If you want to make somebody from DWR twitch, ask them about the 1994 drought water bank. It got ugly. Surface water districts were selling surface water, pumping groundwater to replace it. And one local man, an orchardist, went to his neighbor and said, my well is dropping. My trees will die. I can't afford this. I will lose my farm. And his neighbor, who they had been friends for generations in those families, said, good, then I'll be able to buy your land cheap. So it got really, really ugly. And if you don't want to set up a situation where that kind of ugliness prevails. So I do believe that we do need groundwater management, but I do believe that it needs to be hydrologically real and that the people who are pumping from that need to be the governing body. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Jake Torrens, excuse me.
Thank you. So yeah, I'm a remediation professional, and I wanted to just put in a pitch as you all are working on trying to evaluate and develop this framework for sustainable groundwater management, that there's a lot that the remediation industry can help assist with in terms of finding ways to repurpose water. We spend a lot of money to clean up water when if it's cleaned up above ground, then we are discharging generally under an NPDES permit, and we then end up throwing the water away. And so I feel like I work with a group, it's a nonprofit called Sustainable Remediation Forum. I'm also a practitioner at AMEC Environment and Infrastructure. And we've really been collectively working on ways that we can improve the sustainability of cleanups. And one aspect that we've been exploring for the last year or two is ways that we can encourage the remediation industry to find ways to reuse this water. But one major challenge that we're finding is that when you go after and try to permit these types of reuses, there's a lot of breakdown in terms of education and understanding what the permitting process should be on the local level. And so if this document and framework that we're all working on and what we've had the opportunity to comment on today could explicitly provide some clear framework for the remediation industry to follow, and also reach out to public health officials to outline specifically the types of perceived liabilities and health risks that people are concerned about, because with public participation, stakeholder engagement, you can get ahead of these problems and also show them how you're working collectively to try to solve these problems and try to reuse and repurpose this water in a better way. So that's all.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Ernest Cone.
Thank you for this opportunity. Ernest Cone. I represent various water agencies, primarily in the southern San Joaquin County, in the southern San Joaquin Valley. I've been involved in development of a number of the water banks in Kern County. Our office has participated and represented landowners in the Santa Maria and Antelope Valley adjudications. And most recently, I've been involved with assisting landowners in the Paso Robles area in establishing a water district, which Supervisor Meacham just referred to earlier today. I have two comments that I wanted to make relative to the administration's proposal and concepts that I think need to be taken into account. Obviously, this is, if it comes to fruition, probably the most fundamental change in groundwater law that has occurred in a long, long time. And so it needs to be taken very seriously and deliberately. The first comment, and Sarge Green referred to this earlier, the white spots. It seems like the problem that has been developing, in addition to the reduction in water supplies, is at least in large part, caused by these white spots that have caused localized problems in certain areas of the state that you're all very familiar with. And so that underscores the necessity of any solution having a close, collaborative, working relationship with the counties. They're an essential part to deal with these unrepresented areas. The second point I was going to make is when we speak of additional tools and the ability to, limit extractions. It seems like without further definition that that's really setting up the locals, or if they don't act, the state board, to initiate adjudications. I don't know of any recent adjudication that's taken less than 15 years, and have all taken millions, tens of millions of dollars collectively to prosecute and defend. There's got to be a better way. And I don't know, sitting here today, what that is, but it's a very inefficient way to allocate resources, no question about it. And at the same time, as Art Kidman referred to earlier, you can't just ignore 100 years of jurisprudence. And the courts have been very clear, ending last with the Mojave case from the Supreme Court, that water rights are to be respected. So I think that's the most challenging part of the path you're headed down, is you're going to establish sustainable criteria. That's important. That's a worthy goal. But then when it gets to the point where some type of restriction and pumping is the only avenue left, how is that going to work? And how are you going to implement that without a very time-consuming, costly, and contentious adjudication, as we've seen in other areas of the state? Alternatively, if for some reason there was some kind of administrative process, which of course doesn't exist under the law as we have it now, can you imagine the CEQA document of a local agency or the state board trying to allocate water and consider all the economic consequences of that. Not to mention the potential takings claims that various landowners would bring relative to their overlying rights. So this is something I think it needs to be approached very carefully. It's worthy that you're considering it. There's no question that as a result of reduced water supplies and these white spots and other factors, that conditions have changed, and this is something in terms of new approaches to groundwater that we do need to look at, but we have to do so very carefully. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next is Chris Schutz.
Good afternoon. I'm Chris Schutz with the California Sport Fishing Protection Alliance. I have a few points. First, I'd like to support the letter that came from the Union of Concerned Scientists, specifically its recommendation that the state needs to require individual reporting of groundwater extraction. We've heard this, I think, suggested by some people today. I think some people have assumed it. I know that as I've discussed it with different stakeholders in different parts of the state, there's a lot of resistance to it. I think that underlying that resistance is the feeling that somewhere, somehow, somebody down the line might be able to quantify and therefore reduce the amount of groundwater that's pumped by an individual party. I believe that but I think that it's necessary. There's no, without it, all the policy decisions, all the different levels of consultation, collaboration, and so forth just end up without a factual and numeric basis. I believe that the groundwater pumpers need to report not only to local entities, but also to the state. And I think it needs to be to both. And I'm going to try to explain why. I think the need for reporting to local management entities is self-evident. If they're going to manage, they need to understand where water is going. I mean, if you think of groundwater as sort of a bank account, monitoring the level is the balance. You understand you also have to understand the withdrawals, even if you don't understand the deposits. And if there is a persistent overdraft, the local entity needs some kind of way to try to get a handle on addressing it in an equitable way. And without understanding who's taking what, I really don't think that's possible. I also think that there's a need to report to the state, and I think it would probably be to the state board. I realize that would be resource intensive, and it would be just yet another project that the state board would need to take on, and they're having a lot of trouble as it is sort of getting their arms around surface water reporting. But I think it's the next step, and I think it's essential. But it's not only as a backstop kind of function that I think this is necessary. It's also to address what a number of people have talked about in terms of overlapping or jurisdictions where there is an entity that doesn't correspond to a groundwater area. We've heard a lot today about what some are called white spots. In some cases, it's simply people upstream who are affecting the groundwater levels in managed areas. I think Merced Irrigation District was talking today about how within their district they are in control or they have a positive balance, but those adjacent to them are creating a problem for their area. And in order to be able to look at this on a broader level and to sort of understand where all those overlapping areas and problems are, I think there has to be a central repository of information. Clearly, I think a lot of people have said that there has to be some kind of template or standard form of reporting, and it has to be, some people have called it interactive, but it has to be able to be something that one person's form of reporting has to be intelligible to the next and vice versa. And although I think the culture is very challenging for a lot of groundwater users, I think the reporting needs to be public. I think we've heard that today, not just from environmental types or people who are managers, but from different points of view. And I think that that's really important for everyone in order to have confidence in the information and in order to have transparency and understand what's going on. Finally, we don't have time to develop information if there is a problem. If there's a problem and the state board and some other entity, whether it's a third party or whatever, has to step in, you can't ask that party then to go out and start from ground zero collecting information about groundwater use. That just doesn't make any sense. That's another 3, 4, 5, 10 years, how many years of delay? And that information has to be available so that someone can reasonably and transparently make decisions about what needs to be done in order to bring groundwater use into some kind of balance. One very last thing regarding the authority that exists or the authorities that are necessary. I believe that the state board's existing authority to regulate surface water in some cases extends to groundwater. Our comment letter reflected this or discussed this. One of the beneficial uses, recognized beneficial uses of surface water is groundwater recharge. And when you have a situation where people are applying or actually using surface water in order to recharge groundwater, I think the board should figure out how it has authority and what kind of administration and conservation measures are reasonable so that it just doesn't take water that's jurisdictional and place it under the ground where it's no longer jurisdictional. I think this is also to the benefit of the entities who wish to divert surface water to groundwater in order to create recharge. They need to step up and show that they're not just putting more water or taking more water out of the ground than they're putting in. That's going to allow more of their applications or more of their projects to go forward and at least in some cases perhaps start to redress problems that have existed for a long time. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Next, we have Meg Brown, California Water Association.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. And thanks. It has been long. I will keep my comments short. I'm Meg Katzenbrown with the Nossaman firm. I'm here on behalf of the California Water Association, the Association of California's PUC-regulated water utilities. As we talk about the local groundwater management agencies, I think it's really important to bring to your attention that for the most part, those exclude PUC-regulated water suppliers. Public agency water suppliers can be members of a joint powers authority or an AB 3030 water management group. Mutual water companies, which are not regulated by the Public Utilities Commission, can be members of a JPA, although not an AB 3030 water management group. I think that in areas where PUC-regulated utilities have had a seat at the water management table, have been in special purpose water management districts such as the San Gabriel Valley Water Quality Authority, which Art Kidman spoke about at great length today. That board has an equal number of producers that are regulated utilities as they have public agency representatives. We all have our straws in the basin, as one of the previous speakers noted, and I think it's important that because those utilities bring the same kind of game to the discussion that public agency retailers bring to the discussion, that everyone should in fact be part of the discussion. So as you look at these local models and what it will take to bring compliance with whatever the new paradigm is going to be. I hope that you will look at the regulated utilities as being as much your partners in the process as the public agencies to whom you also turn. Thanks very much.
Thank you. And our last speaker is Carly Stockman.
Thank you. I'm Carly Stockman here today on behalf of California Citrus Mutual. California Citrus Mutual recognizes that some good can result from local management on groundwater, but only if the plan is developed on behalf of stakeholders. And to do this, we believe that the discussion can't be narrowed to just regulating groundwater. They feel that this will inevitably lead to regulations with fees, enforcement and intervention, which aren't really comprehensive to solving the problem, and they end up being disincentives for agriculture's participation. They would like to ask that the discussions and the decisions that follow also include surface water, storage, and infrastructure in order to make this just more comprehensive and incentivize agriculture's participation. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, we'd like to thank everyone, and especially all of you who stuck around to the end. It's been a very informative and provoking conversation. As a reminder, I'd like to really encourage you to get your feedback in as the sooner the better, so that we can structure the April 16th workshop in the most productive manner. And of course, please feel free to spend some more time with any of us individually. Thank you very much.